Hey there. Before we jump into today's episode, we want to thank you for tuning into Unapologetically First Gen. This is the podcast where two sisters share what it's like to grow up as first-generation immigrants, everything from the hilarious moments to the heartfelt ones. Each week, we'll bring you personal stories, honest conversations, and amazing guest interviews that celebrate the first-gen experience. So if you love laughing, learning, and feeling connected, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your friends. It really helps us grow. If you want to contribute to episode topics and get exclusive content, join our Patreon linked in the show notes.
Hello, I'm Stacy, the younger sister. I'm a former teacher turned copywriter, cat mom, and slightly obsessed with romantasy books.
And I'm Lesley, the older one, operations expert, home baker, mom to 2 kids, and a bunny. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Unapologetically First Gen. We have such a special guest. I'm so excited about this episode. We have my mother-in-law here, Soledad. She's coming on, not an immigrant. We're taking a little bit of a shift today. Since it's Pride Month and Juneteenth is this week, we wanted to talk to someone who identifies in both of those spaces. Soledad, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself a little bit?
Hello, both of you. I am Lesley's mother-in-law. She is my favorite daughter-in-law. Who happens to also be the only daughter-in-law I have. I was born here in the United States. You could say I migrated to homosexuality, but after a long search for a home.
I tell us about your journey to finding your home.
I was born in the early 60s and grew up in a household where I didn't even know what it meant to be gay. And I remember as a kid, probably like in the 70s, people would come up to you on the schoolyard and say, "Are you gay?" And if you said yes, thinking like, "Yes, I'm a happy person," they'd say, "Oh, you're gay." I didn't quite understand what it meant, but I just knew that I shouldn't identify that way. I also went to school with a girl whose name was Gay. And so I remember being like really confused, like, what does that mean? But at the same time, we had this long-term family friend, I'll only give her first name, named Barbara, who I think I was maybe about 6 or 7 years old, and she had 5 sons. Her and my mother had become very close when we lived in San Francisco and then again in LA. And one day, Barbara was over our house with Sister Lynn, who was a teacher at my brother's school. I loved Barbara to death, and she told us that she and Sister Lynn were moving to Michigan. So for a good part of my childhood, when I dreamed about growing up, was I'm going to marry a nun and move to Michigan.
That's hilarious.
Right? And life will be good, right? They have festivals there. Not knowing what gay was, and also actually thinking that it only applied to men. I remember at one point thinking that was something that men were.
I think that was common, even in the 80s and 90s. I definitely remember hearing about, like, growing up, that same thing, like, oh, you're so gay, but it being about men.
Exactly. And I also think that that's because, one, we live in a male-dominated society, and 2, men sexualize intimacy between women. They sexualize women, like if you say, oh, they're lesbians, oh, I want to watch. The first thing I struggled with was gender identity. I thought, well, maybe I want to be a boy because I like girls. And then as I got older, as a teenager, I just knew it was something, do not be that. Stop it. I knew I wanted children, and I also thought this is something you have to do with a man.
Which, to be fair, I think at that time probably was the way to have kids, was you had to be.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, you certainly, even now, you definitely need sperm to get pregnant,
right,
but you don't need it for a parent.
My kids have friends who have 2 moms or 2 dads, and where we live, for them, it's very normal. Like, there's no, oh, that's strange, or anything like that, where at the time it would have been very, very unusual.
Exactly. And I didn't know anybody like that. When my mom talked about gay people, it wasn't in a negative way, but it was almost in a way that was, first off, they were all men, and it was in this objectifying way that, like, oh, I know somebody gay,
Mm.
and then, as was common, there was always some bit of tragic story connected to the person, which for decades, even in movies and books, the lesbians and gay folks have to die. By the time I got married, I knew I was a lesbian, and
That makes me so sad for you.
I know, right? It makes me sad for me.
And it's weird I'm very grateful because you did have your son, who I love dearly, and your daughters, who I consider my sisters now. I'm really close to them. But it is a little like, oh man, I wish you had had a different path. But also selfishly, no. And
Right?
I'm sure it's just as complicated for you, right? Because you love your children, but you're also like, I could have lived
Yeah.
a very different life, but it would have been different kids.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember telling myself, "Oh, just raise your kids." If there is someone out there who doesn't yet have kids, who is young and listening to this, don't do that to yourself and don't do it to your children, because it's not fair to you and it's not fair to them. I'll never regret my children, but I do wish that I had made other choices, and it certainly wasn't fair to my kid's father. Am I regretful of that? No, but for other reasons. But like, I really don't care.
But still, and it's regretful for young 20-something you.
Yeah.
Because when I think back about my 20s, and Stacey, you probably are going to have similar feelings, like, it was very, like, carefree and really discovering a little bit about who I am and expanding myself into who I am. But you couldn't do that. You had to really
Yeah.
bring yourself in and make yourself a smaller part of who you are.
Yeah. No, it's true. And I also think that once once you make the decision to uh, stay in the closet, for me, a lot of decisions out of that are ultimately unhealthy. I remember when being in therapy for 10 years and then reaching a point where I just said, I've reached the end of the road. I can't do this. My oldest, Mark, was an adult and out of the house. Yeah, I remember meeting him at work at his job to tell him. And both daughters were in college at the time. I remember the order that I told them. I told my youngest first because I knew, I was just like, this is easy. And then I told Mark, and then I told my middle daughter last. They were all very gracious. Mark said, that makes sense. I mean, pretty much everybody felt like, yeah, like,
That checks out.
right? Smelling that coffee, Mom?
Yeah.
Yeah. So grateful for it. One, of course, is my children, who I love them so dearly. I have nieces and nephews who are lesbians, who are gay, who are trans. I was just in California not too long ago, and I was talking to my nephews, and I said, well, on your dad's side, we have the gay gene. So if you want to know where it comes from, it's on this side. Because almost every one of my 7 siblings, 5 have either a queer child or a queer grandchild.
That's amazing.
I know, right? Like, it's there.
Wow.
So I have bragging rights.
Yeah. But also, how lucky are they to have someone from the previous generation who's lived this whole life in one way and then came to yourself and really understood yourself and then shared that with the world. It's nice that they have someone who has gone through that experience.
Yeah, and I think also just, being a part of the family that we come from, I hope it's easier for them because I wouldn't say that my siblings always understand.
Now to switch gears a bit.
We've talked about this offline, but I think it's an important thing to talk about here too, is the queer dating scene is still very male-centric in the area.
It is, and I think I just think that Boston is, and perhaps many cities, but I can only speak to the cities that I know. Boston, when it comes to the LGBTQ community, I find it to be very male-centric. So I think that white males have P-Town, and others are invited to spend their money there if they so choose, right? I used to go there for years on a regular basis, and it got to the point where I just stopped liking it. You go to a tea dance, and I would find that I was often faced with white men approaching me and then wanting to dance, and then thinking, these are gay men who feel like they can fulfill their internal Black woman fantasy, and they want to grind up against you. P-Town has Queer Women of Color Week, and you might see a few stores have a little sign, welcome queer women of color. But, go into any store, and most of the clothing stores are for men, unless they're the straight-owned stores. I think that, it's one of the reasons why I don't go to Pride. I went to Pride last year because a friend asked me to go, and one, it's too corporate. And
that it is.
Right. And it's like, Target Pride, BMC Pride, MGH Pride, Verizon Pride, right? I don't want that
Target
swag.
I was going to say, no Target Pride.
This year.
I know, right? Exactly. Stonewall was the first Pride. It was a riot. It wasn't a parade to celebrate corporations.
Yeah, it was a TD Bank parade.
Exactly, right? And then I just don't see myself reflected there. And younger Soledad didn't see herself there at all. I went to Atlanta Black Pride with my sister and my niece and nephew, and I had a great time. It was the first time it's like, oh, wow, look at all these Black lesbians. Wow. But you also have to question is, if we're an inclusive community, which we are not, then why do we need a Black Pride? Because it's not an inclusive community. Before I am anything, I am Black. I could go back in the closet and people could wonder, but there is no closet to go in to not be Black.
Mm-hmm. Maybe this question is different now than it would have been 5 months ago, but do you think that the space will open up now with Gen Z, who's now coming into adulthood, and they seem to be doing things very differently? Do you think that there'll be more sort of room to being more inclusive because of that generation?
Boston Pride disbanded because a group of queer folks of color, particularly trans folks, said, hey, make room. And then, and I don't know all of the details, but instead of making room, they just said, oh, we're out. Where I think the change came from is that they didn't ask. They just kicked the door down. I think that things will change. At the same time, 5 years ago, people didn't know that we would be in this political climate. I don't think most trans folks are hiding for cover. I would not blame anyone who said, I have to protect myself to sit this out.
I've had this conversation with different people, but the climate's so scary right now that I'm genuinely worried for trans people.
Yeah, especially in red states.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to think about Pride as a movement and thinking about the first Pride of Stonewall and saw your generation was the fighting force. And I think that my generation don't realize all of the things that happened. I think now we're going backwards on the pendulum. I think we're at this really important moment in history of what's going to happen, of is the pendulum going to swing back, or are we stuck over here? Just thinking about what you said, Lesley, about Gen Z and what's the future going to look like. And it's wild to me that all of this has happened in a lifetime.
Yeah. My age group, really growing up until, probably high school, it's all you really heard about the gay community was about AIDS. Yeah. And you didn't really hear about anything else.
I remember having, I feel like it was freshman year of high school, we had this whole lesson around the etymology of the word gay, and we talked about being called a faggot and where did that come from? There's historical significance and why it's such a derogatory term, and that's in a very liberal city in the 2000s.
Yeah.
And we were still talking about why it's not cool to call people gay as a derogatory term.
Yeah, we're talking years after you were experiencing that in your elementary school. Although I guess you were having the conversation in school, which is probably not allowed anymore.
Right, exactly.
She's like, makes me so angry.
But I bet you that teacher was pushing boundaries. I don't think that everybody was doing that lesson. I think that she was specifically doing it
right
with a purpose.
In the older queer community, there have been conversations about, like I've had conversations with people about, as we moved forward in the fight for equality, a lot of the language began to be, it's our business who we love, the right for marriage, the right for, and these are all things that are true, to have someone be your decision maker if you can't make health decisions for yourself, to have children. But a lot of that was becoming very heteronormative, like we're just like you, we just do it with somebody who looks like us, has the same parts. Yes, we are just like straight people. It's not your business who we have sex with, and we don't always love the people we have sex with.
Wait, so right? Are you saying that you're just a regular human?
I'm just a regular human being, right? We gained a lot. Gained marriage equality and the right to adopt and the right to appoint our partner to make decisions as long as we're married to them, unless you assign them as your healthcare proxy. But a lot of that is giving up your culture, similar to coming here from another country and being told to be more American. You want what the straights have, so prove to the straights that you're just like them.
You're like assimilated.
Yes, exactly. Assimilate into straight culture. I don't think that the younger generation is doing that now, because it's already been done. They don't have to prove that they want to get married. Now, these rights have the potential to be taken away, and who knows what the battle cry will be, but I don't think it will be the same battle cry like what you said, Stacey, that we're humans and that's it, and that's enough. That is enough.
You're human, you're just a person. And I'm thinking particularly about the trans community, because we're not offering that basic decency to our trans friends right now. In the climate that we currently are in, I keep going back to thinking about trans people in this space, because now it's particularly harsh to be a trans person in our current climate.
It is, and it's hard to be anywhere on the spectrum. If someone said to me, Soledad, how do you think you present? I would say I present as soft masculine. If someone says, no, you're presenting like a dude, is our clothing going to be assessed soon? Is someone going to designate which bathroom that we use? One of the things that I like that and these are the good things about social media, of the way people are very quick to respond and quick to come up with things, is that airplane bathrooms are mixed gender. They are for anybody. No one complains about that. Can you imagine if the one on the left was for men and the one on the right was for women? People would flip out.
Did 2 bathrooms in your house?
Right, exactly.
Stacey and I go to the Huntington Theater in Boston a lot, and they redid their space, and now it's gender neutral. It's one bathroom. It is the fastest moving bathroom line I've ever experienced, probably outside of the Boston Ballet, which does have gendered bathrooms, but they also have an old lady with a megaphone yelling at you to hurry up. So.
If I go to a restaurant and they have a bathroom for men, a bathroom for women, and the line for the women is wrong, if a dude walks out, I'm going in. I don't care. My bladder cannot wait for gender. I'm going in.
I'm not here for you. Yeah.
I don't care. That's what locks are for. I just don't care.
I think with this talk about gender, right? The patriarchy thrives on this binary system of male female, because then the white men have all the power. I do think that the culture is changing, where a lot of these rigid rules around what women are supposed to do and what men are supposed to do, even among straight people, are fading a little bit. And not everywhere. Obviously, we have the far right movement that is trying so hard to keep all of these things.
I think that the blurring of the lines for women is because we live in such a capitalist society. The reason that it's become more flexible is because women have to work, because everything in this country is so goddamn expensive. I almost wonder, would we have the same freedoms to be who we want to be in this patriarchal society if it wasn't for how capitalist the society is?
It also comes from a lot of the rights women have gained, being able to have a bank account, being able to run a business, being able to get out of the house, have money, and have that independence, because otherwise we would still be very stuck.
We're a country that's founded on capitalism and racism, and it's worked. successfully. The pendulum is swinging, and it's swinging hard. And I think a couple of things. One of the sad things is how many young people it's taking with it. And I mean like young men, this whole incel group. They are being taken on a very destructive path. And that's shameful because we are losing those children just as we are losing children who are trans or queer, whatever. And I don't think the right gives a damn, because they just sell themselves, well, they were weak, and so they are dispensable. I hope this changes. And ultimately, Trump is going to be out of office, and at some point, a Democrat is going to be in. I think my biggest fear is the plan to undo the damage? Or is it just, what do you want us to do? Let's just forget about that and move forward. Let's focus on the now, which Democrats are really good at saying. Let's focus on the now and move on.
I've been hearing this like rhetoric of Republicans being like, well, you just care too much.
Yeah, I keep hearing that.
And it's like, well, yeah, I care. These are the people in my lives. Like, of course I care.
Yeah. And it's also like, I'm the least Christian of us in this conversation. Why do I care more than you?
I grew up in a time when the Black Panther Party was very active both in Southern and Northern California. And my family was first introduced to it in Northern California in San Francisco when I think 3 of my brothers and I went to a school that was founded by the Black Panther Party, Malcolm X, and I think it still exists. I was really young. This is before I was in the first grade, and I remember it, and it's impacted me to this day. We spent most of our time going to rallies because Huey P. Newton was incarcerated, and standing outside of courthouses sing "Black is beautiful, free Huey," said right. Like my brothers used to always say to my mother, "Why did you send us there?" I was like, "Why did you take us out?" I wanted to be there. And I remember the books that were there, like Ntozake Shange books there, and Nikki Giovanni and Ruby Dee, the actress, had a book of poetry that was around the house, and Black folk tales. That was the literature that I read and loved. I think that's been the deepest influence on me, and certainly the Black Panther Party and Huey P. Newton, very problematic, very misogynistic, telling women, wait for yours, you got to stand up, lift up the man. Can we come up together? But it's still a patriarchal society, right? Through most of my working life, I've always worked in some type of activist capacity. That's the big part of my identity. I say all that to say, like, the way you and Mark are raising your children, the way your parents raised you, the way I raised my children, it has to open up doors. I think that this old guard is just going to fade away. And I think that's why they are working so hard to rewrite history and strip history, because they know that they are the dinosaurs. So it's strip history, strip it away so that it's never there for anybody to read.
In terms of like, especially with how we're raising our kids and how our friends are raising theirs, you definitely already see this sort of difference. Like our oldest, when she hears of a family having 2 moms or 2 dads, or we're reading a book, one of her favorite books called Patience Patches. One time she pointed at so there's like, it opens and like the dog jumps up on the bed and there's 2 adults in bed. And she was like, this is the mommy and this is the daddy. And I was like, no, that's the mommy and that's the other mommy. And she was like, oh, okay.
Gosh, I have the cutest kid story related to this. I believe it was my 2nd grade class. We had these stuffed animals that we would use for our meetings, and the stuffed animal was the talking piece, so you would move them around. And I don't remember the YouTube channel. I'll have to look it up and then we can post it. But anyway, it was this YouTube channel that was like made to teach kids about being queer and like LGBTQ and all of this stuff. So we watched this video on pronouns, and it was like the cutest thing, because the next day at morning meeting, one of the kids was like, wait, what are the pronouns of the animals? And we like had to have this whole conversation, and it was really interesting because we had kids coming in the next day being like, well, my dad said there's only 2 pronouns. It's either they're a he or a she, and the other kids push back and they're like, well, actually, I think that they're a they. It's so normal for them. It's not like this whole big thing. They're just like, oh, this is just the way that the world works, and we're going to be inclusive no matter what pronouns people or animals or stuffed animals choose.
Adults make it complicated for children because of our fears or our biases, or I don't want you to be that. If you know that people can use they, them pronouns, you might want to do it. If I had known that it would be okay to be a lesbian, I would have just been that way as a child, if I had known it was okay.
Imagine if you had a little lesbian stuffed animal with you.
Right? Exactly. Right? And the thing is, society forced me to be straight. That was forced upon me. Why is that okay? My mother has since passed on, but she swore that she was, well, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with it. But I remember being a kid and her saying to me, are you a lesbian? And me being like, shut the door. Like, no. One of the things that we hear a lot is, I don't care what you do in your bedroom. And it's like, well, I go to work gay. I go to work. I go to the grocery store gay. I use the toilet gay. It's not something I just put on when I go to bed and when someone is in the bed with me.
I hate that it gets reduced down to just this like sexual thing. Exactly. You're also gay in your relationship. You're also gay with the person that you're having a dinner date with. It's just so annoying when I hear that argument. I don't care what they do in the bedroom. And you're still gay.
Yeah.
Outside of that, it's possibly the argument that irks me the most.
Yeah, and so many people. One of my exes, that's the message that she got. Just don't bring it home. One of my nephews has that message. Just don't bring it into my house. And I remember saying to my nephew, if being in your parents' house is something you need, if you have to be there because that's the only place you have to live, that you just got to hang in there. But if it's not, leave, and leave with all of you, and they don't get any part of you. So don't call me to come fix something. You and all your gayness, leave. You don't get a part of me that isn't gay because it doesn't exist.
The version of me that comes over to fix your computer, also gay.
Right? Right? Like, that's the same person that gets down with men, right? Take it or leave it.
Right.
You don't get to choose.
I do hope that it brings you a lot of joy and comfort to know that none of your grandchildren will have to deal with any of that sort of nonsense. I saw a shirt at like a Kohl's or something that was one of those disgusting shirts about like daddy says I can't date or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it was like pink, obviously, because like why would dad have any issue with his son dating? It's obviously just an issue with his daughter. I took a picture of it and I sent it to my mom group. One of them was like, I don't get what the issue is. I'm sure your husband will feel that way when she's a teenager and boys are knocking on the door. And I was like, first of all, no. Secondly, I was like, who says there are going to be men knocking on her door? I'm leaving it wide open.
Exactly.
You tell me who you're going to date. I'm not going to make any assumptions. Even if they are straight, I'm not going to make that assumption because I want you to feel comfortable showing up as your whole self. And
absolutely.
That's probably going to mean experimenting and figuring out who you like. I don't think it is for everybody obvious, especially when you're hitting puberty and things are super confusing anyway. But also, my husband would never be like, I'm going to show up at the door with a shotgun. Like, no.
Yeah.
If anyone's going to show up with a shotgun in that relationship, it's you.
I know, right? Exactly.
Probably that's how I would end up in jail with my cousins. Right. It would be like, somebody's treating my babies wrong. You can still have a family and be in whatever relationship you want. So yeah, we're leaning strong into just being super open about it. And I hope that brings you a good deal of comfort that your grandkids will never have to experience that kind of hidden shame of growing up being like, I think this is who I am, but I don't want to open that door.
Yeah, I do want that for my grandchildren. Also, particularly for you and Mark's children, in terms of race, I also don't want them to hide their blackness either.
Yeah.
What I worry for them is that they're going to be, and not when they're adults, but when they're children, that they're going to be privy to conversations that white folks are having about black people, thinking that they're not black, and then how do they react to that? And I imagine that that conversation when they come home and they want to know, are we Black? Is Daddy Black? Are you Black? Or because it's all about presentation. That's my biggest fear for them, of navigating that, because I think for most Black folks, that's the first thing we navigate, is our Blackness. And I certainly grew up being incredibly ashamed of being Black, of being queer, like everything. So I think for my grandchildren, I just don't want them to grow up with shame.
I hear you, and it is something that I've thought about too. Mark and I have had these conversations. We want to make sure that they're embracing all of who they are, and that's their Portuguese side and their Black side,
which is America. They're Americans. They have a father who is a Black American and a mom who is white first gen, and all the trauma that comes with that, and all the beautiful things that come with it as well.
It's one of those things where, this is true with all things parenting, you just don't really know how to deal with it until it comes knocking on your door. Then you're like, oh, well, let's figure it out. But I have had those thoughts. I will say the family we spend time with is not vocal anymore about their racism. Stacey and I have done a really good job shutting down a lot of things like that. Are you hearing what you're saying?
I think we have a lot of Black people in the family now. I think that has changed. A lot of people married Black people, which I understand. I feel like as immigrants, it's so much easier. I always feel like growing up, I was so much more connected to the Black community and the immigrant community than I was to white people. So it makes sense.
Especially to wealthy white people.
Oh, yeah. And this is I don't want to start a whole new conversation because we've been talking for so long, but I think growing up as a white immigrant, I didn't see the racism. I was oh, it's a class thing because we don't have money and we're struggling. And I realized how, these are all of my privileges showing up in white skin. This is how my experience is different than other immigrants from other places and from people of color in this country, that I started to really unlearn everything that I had learned. But it took me until after college, really.
Oh, same.
Yeah.
Same.
And I can see that.
Yeah, because when you have privilege, you don't see the privilege. That's part of the privilege, is you really
you
have to you do, because you're just oh, obviously this is just, or oh, that's a weird one-off. No, you really do have to stop and really critically think about what's going on around you and unlearn.
Yeah. I remember Sarah, all my kids had gone to the McDonald's down the street. I let them walk down there by themselves. They got home and they told me that some kids stopped them. The kids wanted to fight with them. And the kids asked them, are you Dominican or are you Puerto Rican? And Sarah said, we're Americans. And I remember them coming home and telling me. And, when it was the first time that they were confronted with race, and Sarah was just we're Americans,
what are you even talking about?
I don't know what you mean by a Dominican, I don't know what you mean by a Puerto Rican, but we're and she said Americans,
I love that. I totally hear her saying that, a young version of her.
Right, exactly.
Mark still gets Dominican a lot.
Yeah, so does his dad. When I was coming up, and then on the West Coast, often people thought that I was mixed, that someone in my family was white. And then now I have my kids who, to some, particularly to white people, their background is very ambiguous. But when you talk about privilege, for maybe not all three, but my kids have kind of had the privilege of moving through that world, similar to the privilege that I've had, I can't deny, of being light-skinned in my generation, where that was the privilege. You're still Black, but you are unacceptable than the privilege that comes to that came to my children, and that the privilege that will come to your children, and how you navigate it will be their battle, right? So it's what we teach them, and then how they choose to identify, because how they see you and Mark may not be how they see themselves, right? They may just say, we are Portuguese Americans. They may say, we are Portuguese Black Americans. I don't know.
Right.
And
this is one of those unlearning and relearning things I'm constantly going to have to do as they grow up and grow into who they are.
And then there's the whole other layer of Portugal's relationship with Black people in general.
Yeah.
The Portuguese were the leading slave traders. They traded more slaves than literally anybody. That's part of our history too. And
yeah, that's something that they're going to learn about and hopefully want to talk about.
I
Not
learned
just about learning how to do their hair.
Right.
I got so much to learn.
Right. My maternal grandmother's grandfather was white. I'd always known that. And, essentially say, well, like for Black folks, right, somebody's white because of rape and yada, yada, yada. And then come to find out that's not the story. That in, of all places, Mississippi, this white man is married, although you couldn't marry, to a Black woman and raise children together. And his mother is Daughters of American Revolution. She's straight out of Virginia. I haven't been able to ascertain if she owned slaves, but most likely she did. And her husband was a Texas Ranger, so a slave hunter. But these were the relationships that happened were consensual relationships. So they weren't forced. Whatever great level of great she is, you find in the census that her third and final child is listed as Black. The story I got from a cousin was that she had this child and the white folks in the town said, tell us who the father is, tell us who raped you. And she said no, and she sent the child away, the Midwest. And her son, who is the grandfather of my grandmother, is in a relationship with a Black woman who loved his children, who also took in other children who were being hidden from white folks. So it's not this horrible story, but a story that still has a horrible history in terms of what happened.
What a privilege to know your story. How cool.
Right? Oh my God, it's amazing. And I was fortunate to connect with this cousin.
Thank you, Soledad, for coming on and taking the stage so that we can represent some other identities besides our own. With that is the end of this season. Thank you so much for listening. We are going to be taking a summer break, but we will be back in the fall. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes and join our Patreon for all the behind the scenes things.
Yeah. Happy summer and happy Pride.